I'm alarmed. I'm alarmed about the border policies of the Biden-Harris administration and the impact that will have on America for years to come, regardless of who gets elected. I'm Kerry. Not only am I a pastor, but I've been an anti-human trafficking activist for many, many years, and that I think that I bring to this issue somewhat of a unique perspective. I invite you to keep watching to see if this situation isn't as alarming to you as it is to me. So I've been giving a lot of thought about the future and what it holds for our country. And, it's always risky business to think that you can predict the future. Now, I'm not saying I can predict the future, but I think that I can see what paths that we're heading. And I can see where we're going to end up if Kamala Harris wins the election. And I don't think that's good for us as a country. But I also see where we end up if Donald Trump wins the election. And I think that we're going to face some very serious challenges if that's the case too. As I said, I've been a pastor for almost 50 years, but I've been an anti-human trafficking activist since the early 2000s, and I helped launch an anti-human trafficking training organization here in the U.S., which has gone on to train law enforcement throughout the country, including ICE and FBI and local law enforcement agencies, various public groups and government institutions, including the U.S., not the U.S., but a state Supreme Court. And on one occasion, our executive director even spoke with Kamala Harris when she was an attorney general of the state of California. I also have served a nonprofit service provider to survivors of trafficking in Southeast Asia. And I've been to that region 13 times, helping folks, helping young girls, to get on the road to recovery from that experience after being trafficked. So let me share with you some of my thoughts. And one of the things that we discovered early on when we were here in America, going about and training different government agencies, is we would raise the question of who controls our southern border from the Mexico side. Now, at that time, it wasn't a done deal, but here in America now, it is. And the answer to this question of who controls our borders from the Mexico side is the Mexican cartels. Now, there are five major cartels that operate along our southern border. There's the Sinaloa cartel, and they predominantly operate in Arizona and California. These five different cartels, by the way, will from time to time collaborate and to facilitate the transport of drugs across the borders, sharing routes or resources to avoid law enforcement. Another one of the big five of the cartels is the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Now, they have a presence in multiple regions across the U.S. border, like Tijuana and parts of the Texas border. And again, the cartels will collaborate with each other when they are seeking to manage and to profit from human smuggling activities. And we're going to be talking about this whole issue of smuggling versus trafficking. The two are not the same, and we're going to be talking about that here in a little bit. So another one of the major players of the Mexican cartels is the Gulf Cartel, and they primarily operate along the eastern part of the Texas border, including cities like Matamoros and Reynosa. And here again, the cartels will form temporary alliances to fend off government forces or rival groups that are threatening their lucrative territories. Then we have the Juarez cartel, and they control areas around the Ciudad Juarez, El Paso border crossing. And if you've ever been down there and seen that region, it's just a nightmare. But the cartels, once again, will cooperate, and they may work together to establish or maintain bribery systems within law enforcement and government agencies. Then there's Los Zetas, the fifth major player in this, and they operate in northeastern Mexico, affecting parts of the Texas border, especially near Nuevo Laredo. Now, collaborations between cartels are typically pragmatic and can be short-lived due to the underlying rivalries and competitions for power. So, in my research in preparing for this presentation, I started to drill down into figuring out what countries are known countries to be places where the Mexican cartels operate, and I was surprised. So in Latin America, of course, and we always think about the Mexican cartels operating in Latin America, but here's a list of the Latin American and South American countries that are with known ties to the Mexican cartels: Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Brazil. But then I was wondering that does their reach extend even further than just in Latin America? So I began searching and discovered that in Europe, here's a list of the European countries with known ties to the Mexican cartels: Spain, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Portugal, and Ireland. So I didn't want to stop there, and I asked, here's about African countries, and here are some of the African countries with known ties to the Mexican cartels: Nigeria, Guinea, Bissau, Ghana, South Africa, Mali, Kenya, and Morocco. Then I began wondering about the Asian countries, and here are the Asian countries with known ties to the Mexican cartels: China, India, Myanmar, or what used to be Burma, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Australia. And I know it's not an Asian country, but I'm just putting it in there so that we can have an easy way of thinking about these. I was talking with my colleague the other day about where we're at in America now, and she knows more about this whole issue of human trafficking, and it's the problem that it poses to our country and to the whole world, for that matter, than anybody I know. Is that she's literally a genius on this and has researched this topic thoroughly for many, many years. And I've known a lot of the major players in this whole anti-human trafficking. I'm talking about the anti-human trafficking space. But of all the major players that I've ever encountered, she's the one who has the most exhaustive knowledge on this topic. She told me the other day that the Chinese cartels are now in league with the Mexican cartels, not just for drug smuggling, smuggling drugs into America, but also in money laundering operations for the cartel money. And she also told me a startling fact that, or at least made a startling claim about what's going on. And she said that it's now known to be that 90% of U.S. gangs have some tie to the Mexican cartels. Well, let's go on and take a little bit, drill a little bit deeper into this whole topic. And when we ask about what Middle Eastern countries have known ties to the Mexican cartels, that includes Lebanon, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, and Syria. All of this for me blew my mind when I saw how far the tentacles of the cartels reach across the globe. But you might say, well, you still haven't answered the question, the big question of as to why you think that this will be such a big problem for Americans, regardless of who gets elected. And so be patient. I'm going to get there and unpack that for us. Then, as I was studying this a little bit further and drilling down into this, not just thinking in terms of who controls our border, but how much money the Mexican cartels make from their activities. And you remember, people always say, follow the money. Well, when you follow the money, you're going to be surprised at the revenues that the Mexican cartels make from their illegal activities. And one of those illegal activities is human smuggling. But human smuggling is really, well, it's a major source of revenue for or main source of revenue for the Mexican cartels that I don't believe that it even scratches the surface of the problem with human trafficking. And we'll see how that works in just a minute. But during the Biden-Harris administration, with the border policies that were enacted during the Biden-Harris administration, and by the way, you can believe what you want to believe about this, but I could see that there was no pressing humanitarian crisis that required the lax border policies that the Biden-Harris administration adopted. And certainly as we saw this unfold, is that we saw more and more and more and more young men of military age from all over the world pouring into our country. It was just not these people who were fleeing oppressive countries and governments in other parts of the world. And I think you'll see in just a little bit of how this fits together. But during the Biden-Harris administration, the Mexican cartels have made $13 billion a year on human smuggling alone. Now, law enforcement agencies and people who are in this space do their best to estimate these numbers. I'm giving you the best information that I could find from my research. But let's remember that the Mexican cartels don't report their finances to the IRS. But then I asked the question of how much money do the Mexican cartels make annually from human trafficking? Now, this was always a challenge for us when we were teaching on this topic because, and I think that the average American doesn't understand the difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. They are two separate crimes, and that human trafficking is a much more lucrative activity, criminal enterprise for the cartels than smuggling is. And of course, they're both pretty lucrative. But one estimate by the International Labor Organization says that human trafficking generates about $150 billion globally each year, with a significant portion of that being funneled through the Mexican cartels. Now, let's see if we can do the math on the fly here. All of a sudden, is that the cartels are making $150 billion a year through trafficking. Then we add on top of that $13 billion a year through smuggling, but we're not done yet with the various criminal activity that the cartels engage in. And you can begin to see why it's so important for the cartels to keep our borders as open as possible. Because some estimates have suggested when it comes to the drug sales from drug trafficking that could be anywhere from $20 billion to $30 billion a year annually. So, we're getting pretty close to that $200 billion range per year annually. Now, these numbers are difficult. I admit that they're difficult to pin down precisely due to the illegal nature of the activities and the complexity of the drug trade networks. But the people who spend their time researching these types of topics have come up with their number. And so I'm going to trust that number is pretty accurate until I hear otherwise. But the cartels are not just involved in drug sales and drug trafficking, because they also make money from illegal arms sales, prostitution. It was the whole space of sex work that initially brought me into this anti-human trafficking arena, because I learned about the children who were being exploited. And I just thought, there's two types of people in the world: and the people who say something must be done, and people who say I must do something. So I decided to do something, and that's how I got involved in working with these various agencies and launching this anti-human trafficking effort here in the U.S. So these illegal activities include arms sales, prostitution, extortion, kidnapping, and money laundering. And so once again, we don't have precise numbers on all of these, but you can begin to see that it just keeps on mounting up and up and up. Now, I thought, well, the cartels are smart enough that not to just engage in illegal activities, but obviously that they have plenty of money to get involved in legal activities where they can launder their ill-gotten gains. And the Mexican cartels have infiltrated various businesses to launder their money and to diversify their income streams. And some of the businesses that they are involved here, right here in America, these legitimate businesses are gambling, agriculture, specifically the cultivation of marijuana and hemp. Is that I have a little bit of a background in and a little bit of knowledge in that, because we have a family member from Humboldt County, and that whole region in Humboldt County, if I remember right, then I don't know if the marijuana cultivation is now the number one cash crop in California. I have had to verify that, but at that time it was the second largest cash crop in California. But what we are seeing more and more is that even in the legal marijuana cultivation businesses, is that the cartels are moving into that space to control that. They are also involved in real estate, mining, retail and restaurants, and transportation and logistics. And it just makes sense, when you got product to move and people to move, that one of the activities that you can get involved in is transportation and logistics. So I was thinking about this and how all of this begins to add up. Remember, we started to calculate and as we were going along. And then I asked myself, how do the Mexican cartels' revenues, how do they how do they stack up to the GDP of various countries? And I discovered that the Mexican cartel's revenues rivals or surpasses many countries around the world. I looked up what countries have a GDP of approximately 400 billion, and give or take. And amongst those countries are Vietnam, Iran, Egypt, Colombia, Nigeria. $300 billion, and all of these are within the space of the type of revenues that the cartels bring in. $300 billion countries include Pakistan, Chile, Peru, Kazakhstan, Iraq. $200 billion countries include Algeria, Qatar, Ukraine, Ethiopia, Kuwait, and $100 billion countries include Sudan, Oman, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and Myanmar. Now, imagine if some of the worst of these countries were right across our southern border. And that's exactly what we find ourselves in with respect to the Mexican cartels. Now, the Mexican cartels have a large footprint in Mexico. And I'm not saying all of Mexico is corrupt, but what I am saying is that the cartels are a significant bad actor on the world stage, and they are parked right at our southern border. How secure would you feel if parked at your southern border was Iran or Nigeria, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Iraq, Qatar, Ukraine, is that Sudan, some of these countries? What I'm saying here is that that this issue of the Mexican cartels pose a major threat to American stability. And I'm going to show you how in just a moment. Remember, I said that that this whole issue of smuggling is not the same as trafficking. Human smuggling is different from human trafficking. They are two separate crimes. Human smuggling generates revenue by getting people into America, but human trafficking generates revenue by keeping people in America. Now, here in Southern California, and I don't know what it's like where you live, but here in Southern California, we see these flower vendors all over the city. We see juice vendors, sidewalk vendors all over the city. Different little restaurant or little food vendors all over the city, and that and this has just become part of our culture here. Now, I'm not saying, now you got to be clear about this, is that I'm not saying that all of these people who are engaged in these activities are bad actors. But what I'm saying is that more than likely they are people who not just have been smuggled into America, but who are being trafficked here in America, even as we speak. Now, let me get a little bit clearer on how that works. But first of all, I want to talk about the wristbands. When people are brought into America, it doesn't matter from wherever they come, when they're brought into America, they all have to, it's kind of like, going to an amusement park nowadays, or a concert or some other venue, is that every one of these folks that come into America have to wear a wristband, and they're instructed to tear it off as soon as they cross the border. Now, these wristbands signify which agents of the cartel recruited the migrant. So, in other words, what partner gangs peppered throughout the world are the ones that recruited the migrant. And second, they indicate if payment has been made by the migrant to get into America. And remember, that all has to deal with human smuggling. But now we begin to see the connection with trafficking, because it also shows if that person's personal information has been entered into the Mexican cartel's database. The Mexican cartel's database identifies the family and friends of migrants, and it's the key to debt bondage. So these folks that we see, all throughout our communities, at least here in California, and you probably see them all throughout. There have been estimates, and I don't know, you don't know who to believe, because every political person's going to quote their own numbers, but anywhere from 11 million illegal immigrants or undocumented migrants, however you want to phrase it, have entered our country, to 20 million. They have been distributed all throughout the country. But the key to all of this is that just because they paid the price to get into America, the fact of the matter is that they continue to pay the price while in America. And the whole key to this is debt bondage. So let me talk a little bit about debt bondage. Debt bondage is the invisible chains that keep people enslaved in human trafficking, whether it's labor trafficking, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and it is the biggest source of revenue for the cartels. It is hopelessly naive to think that the cartels are making all of their money off of smuggling people into America. The lion's share of the profits that the cartels generate is off of people who have been smuggled into America now that they're here, and it's absolutely the biggest source of revenue for the cartels. How does it work? Well, debt bondage, like I say, is these invisible chains that keep smuggled people. It keeps smuggled people. It ensures that they continue to make payments to the cartels long after they're in America. And the database is key to this happening. Because in the cartel's database, how this works is that the local gangs that they work with throughout the world, who have identified the person to bring into the country, those local gangs also identify the family members left behind by that person, the friends and family members of that, the loved ones that are left behind by the person who has entered into America. And so let's just use this scenario. Let's say that a farm worker comes into America and they are being paid by the labor broker that oftentimes, by the way, is a cartel shell here in America, is that they're being paid by the labor broker for their farm work, but also that labor broker is charging them for their lodging and for their meals and for in their safety and their medical and all of that stuff. And so what happens is that they are beholden to that agency that they're working for, and much of that money is being funneled back to the cartels. And the way that this works is that you are on the hook. Once you've been smuggled in, you're on the hook to keep your payments up, because if you don't, the cartels have access to your family and friends back home, and they have plenty of very effective ways to coerce your compliance. Now, let me talk a little bit about the dangers that I see that this poses for us in the U.S., regardless of who's elected, whether it's Trump or Harris. And there are two different pathways that I see with respect to this. Now, one is that I think I have a pretty clear understanding of how America will become a one-party state if Kamala Harris is elected. Once again, it kind of set your political persuasions aside for a moment and just kind of walk through this to see if there's any logical chain of thinking that makes sense of this scenario. How this works is that by flooding America with illegal immigrants, the Biden-Harris administration has massively enriched and empowered the Mexico cartels. Now, Kamala Harris loves to talk about how that she has prosecuted transnational gangs, transnational criminal organizations, but it's one thing to prosecute a particular case, and it's an entirely different thing to pave the way for political instability in our country. And here's how I see that works. And so the Biden-Harris administration has opened the doors through their lax border policy that has, as a result, empowered and enriched the cartels through smuggling. But also, once these people are in America, that the revenues keep flowing back to the cartels. That's how human trafficking works. Once it keeps flowing back to the cartels through debt bondage. The cartels are smart enough to figure out this system, and I wish that more Americans would wake up to the fact of what's going on in America. Smuggling is just the tip of the iceberg. It's trafficking that is the major problem that we find ourselves facing in our country today. And once these folks have been assimilated throughout our culture, the fact of the matter is that they continue to make payments back to the cartels through debt bondage. The cartels have ensured, and even U.S. gangs now will enforce that those payments are kept current. So then what happens next is that any political party, and I'm saying, I just want you to think about these issues. I'd like for you kind of set aside your emotions and your biases for a moment and just think that any political party that can fast track illegal immigrants into citizenship puts a lock on all future elections. Now, it's a fact, and you can do your own research, is that you look it up online, and Kamala Harris has talked over and over and over again about updating our immigration policies. And while she will talk very sternly about the bad hombres that have come into our country, you see, the real problem is not just the bad hombres who have come into our country. The real problem is the people who are stuck in our country and are held hostage, are enslaved through debt bondage. get informed on these topics. Boy, when I started to see this years ago, what was going on, like I said, my mind was blown on this. And I'm telling you right now, citizenship is not the solution, because you can make these folks who have come in, and I want to be very clear, is that the vast majority of the people that have come in, or I don't know if it's the vast majority, but I don't have problems with people who want to find a better life in America. But what I have a problem with is how this is undermining the integrity of our country. And so any political party that can fast-track illegal immigrants into citizenship puts a lock on all future elections. And the reason why that's the case is that the cartels do not want to lose access to their mainstream of revenue, and that's all the people who are in America right now who are still being trafficked by the cartels. And you can grant them citizenship, but that doesn't let them off the hook for how the cartels will continue to exploit them because of the hold that they have on their loved ones back in the countries that they've come from. Now, on one hand, with the Democrats, we have the team of Biden, Harris, and that the people who have come into America, that Biden, Harris let them in. Harris promises to keep them here, but the cartels will ensure how they vote. And here again, follow the money. Just think about this, is that the cartels stand to lose billions and billions and billions of dollars if they lose access to the people that they now have brought in to America. So let me kind of map out this scenario, how it works regardless, is that the Mexican cartels are now thoroughly entrenched in America. So what does that mean for our upcoming elections? Well, if Harris wins, and that there will be a fast track to citizenship for friendlies, and that's not, like these guys that we see here in this graphic, but once those friendlies have become citizens, that's a lock on a one-party state, because the cartels don't want to lose access to the people that they have trafficked throughout America. And they can pretty well guarantee how they'll vote. And so the friendlies, you have to understand this, the friendlies are a bigger threat than the bad hombres. Now, I get why Trump talks about the bad hombres and about the folks from the prisons and the mental institutions and so on and so forth, because for a lot of people that's the easiest way for them to get that message. But it's the friendlies. It's not just the bad hombres. It's the friendlies that pose the biggest threat to our democratic system because of their connection with the cartels. And any political party that can fast track illegals to citizenship will stay in power from there on out. But what if Trump wins? Well, here's what I think about that, is that deportations will spawn resistance from the cartels, resulting in heightened chaos throughout America. There are enough bad hombres all throughout America now that can be triggered to act on behalf of the cartels to protect their interest in maintaining this enterprise of human trafficking throughout America. And so what I'm seeing is that on one hand, if Harris wins, most likely we are going to lose our freedom. and we will become a one-party state. However, if Trump wins, I think most likely that we are going to lose our security. I'm talking about the security that we enjoy within America, because the fact of the matter is that there are enough bad hombres that have now aligned themselves with our local gangs throughout the U.S. that can create plenty of chaos. You know, I was just researching this the other day, and that the 5 U.S. cities that have the largest cartel presence in them throughout America now, number 5 is Denver, Colorado. Number 4 is Phoenix, Arizona. Number 3 is Atlanta, Georgia. And number 2 is Los Angeles, California. But number 1 of those 5 is Chicago, Illinois. The Mexican cartels are coming to a city near you. And so I see that we're at a troubling crossroads here in America, regardless of who gets elected. From where I sit, I think that America is headed for some troubling times, regardless of who's elected, and that's why I'm alarmed. If you're a person of prayer, pray for America, but all American citizens, Christian or non-Christian, whatever your persuasion happens to be, I would urge you